Everybody, and welcome to today's webinar in which we're going to discuss the key HR trends for 2024. Just to let everybody know that a copy of the slides and a recording of today's webinar will be sent out to you all in the coming days. So before we make a start, we would like to do our normal introductions. So I'm Victoria Templeton, HR Knowledge Manager, and I'm supported by Sue Watson, our Operations Director. Together, we're going to take your questions and answers at the end, run some polls and discuss the answers. And we're also supported in the background by our HR Hannah Wallace, our marketing manager. She's going to be on hand just to help with any technical issues or questions that may come up through the webinar, but hopefully we won't get any of those. And because we've got so many of you who have joined us today, we've placed you all on mute. However, we do want to hear your questions. So when you see this slide, it means we're at the end of the webinar and we're going to be ready to take your live questions, and we'll take as many as we can in the time permitting. So I'm just going to give you a quick run through of how you can submit your questions today. So on the screen now, you'll see an image of your GoToWebinar panel, and simply type in your question in the question pane and then submit, and then we'll aim to read out, as I said, as many as we can at the end of the webinar today. When you see this slide, it means we're going to be running a confidential poll. So we find that these polls on our webinars make the session interactive. It's good for everybody to see what other organisations are experiencing, any challenges that businesses are facing. So it gives us some good insights into how attendees on this webinar are sort of dealing with the topic that we're discussing. So they are confidential, and when you see this slide, it means we're going to run them. All I say is that if you want to participate, just make sure you're not in the full screen mode on your device system. For some reason, GoToWebinar only operates the polls when you're not in that mode. So before we get going, I'm just going to run through what we'll cover today. So obviously we're going to looking at the HR trends, what we're going to expect to see for the year ahead, and then we're going to look at some of the employment law developments coming along, and then take your questions and answers at the end. In terms of the employment law, we are going to just give you a headline, high-level update today on all of the legislation. There is lots and lots coming up for next year, but we do have a free virtual employment law seminar that we're going to be running in March. So it's in that seminar where we're going to go into the real detail about each of the pieces of legislation and give some practical guidance. So do join us for that. I'll give you details at the end about how you can register for that event. But for the purpose of today, it's a headline as to what we need to start thinking about, what we need to prepare for. So 2024 is going to be a busy year. There's lots and lots going on. So as a high level, I see that we're going to see recruitment and retention continue to be a key area of focus, resource planning, data and artificial intelligence. There's some external influences that we need to be mindful of, and as I've just mentioned a moment ago, employment law and the developments that we're going to see in there. So these are the key areas that we think are the key areas of focus for business and HR leaders next year. So when we think of recruitment and retention, it is going to continue to be a challenge for many businesses next year. And in our most recent research that we carried out, we asked webinar attendees about recruitment in their own business, and they shared their challenges. We found that 80% of those on the webinar had continued to experience recruitment challenges. The biggest challenge facing employers was regarding a skills shortage. That was 43%. There was also 24% that felt that there was a candidate shortage. 15% felt that there was a challenge in regards to the time that it takes to hire. And there's also an increasing demand for candidates that are seeking hybrid working. That was 11% result. And finally, the cost per hire. That was a challenge of 7% of our respondents. And we also found that pay was another key factor with recruitment, with 23% of businesses reporting an inability to meet the wage demands of candidates. And so this information is really insightful and useful because it does indicate that it is still a challenge. It is a key focus for business and HR leaders, and it will continue into 2024. There are plenty of ways in which these recruitment challenges can be mitigated by organisations, such as employing apprenticeships. They obviously can help provide future talent, developing and training individuals in line with the needs of the business. There's perhaps something called quiet hiring, which is a term used to leverage the capabilities of your current workforce to acquire new skills and therefore reduce the need to recruit externally. And there's other things like having preferred recruitment agencies, being efficient with data-driven recruitment, and hybrid and remote working, for example. These are just some ways in which you can mitigate some of those challenges, and we've dealt with these in detail in previous webinars, so do check out on our main website for the recordings of those. When it comes to recruitment and retention, then we do expect to see hybrid and remote working continue to be a key attraction for job applicants. We also expect it to be a key employee benefit, aiding staff retention. Workers are seeking out a more modern and flexible way of working to suit their lifestyles, because we're seeing more people taking on greater caring responsibilities. So giving employees their ability to better manage their working hours will continue to be a great tool in terms of retaining talent and attracting it as well. Resource planning is another key area for 2024. Recruitment and retention, as it continues to be a challenge, resource planning is going to be a key business activity. Having that effective resource planning in place really needs to stem from your overall strategic people plan, and a strategic people plan must also align and derive from the overall business plan. Doing so will ensure that the business can achieve success through its people by having the right skills, capabilities in the right place, and focusing on HR initiatives that addresses the organisation's challenges such as recruitment and retention. So make sure that resource planning is incorporated into your strategic plans. And if we think about data, technology, artificial intelligence, then we've seen advancements over the last 6 months, and it's only going to get greater in 2024. Not only is data key to business decision making, it provides that meaningful management information by allowing you to make that right strategic decision to be made. But the technology behind the data is also of great importance to organisations and businesses' success, and artificial intelligence is only going to be used more and more, and so it's going to be really important for businesses to know the ethical and legal considerations for when they use AI in the workplace, and making sure that they're doing so in line with that. So data and AI is going to continue to be a main focus. So we're going to run a few polls first of all around some of the challenges that we expect. So Sue, if I could ask you to launch the first one, and it's really just to understand from all of you what you expect to be your biggest HR challenge in 2024, whether it's recruitment, retention, resource planning, redundancies, employment law. There's lots there, but let us know.
Just give that a few minutes.
Yep.
They're coming in thick and fast. Lots of R's there, aren't there?
Yeah.
Okay, I think most people have voted now. So we will
Let's have a look.
Close that poll and I'll share the results. There we go.
Okay. Oh, okay. So recruitment, yeah, and retention, it is still a big challenge, isn't it? We ourselves, experience those challenges. Employment law, yeah, and we'll come on to that in shortly, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on, and actually redundancies, surprisingly, is probably a lower percentage than I perhaps thought. I don't know about you, Sue, but
yeah, there's a lot going on at the moment, so maybe people are hoping for some stability next year.
Yeah.
And hence the resource planning, the recruitment, retention,
Yeah.
that bit being the retaining staff, upskilling staff. Maybe that's the, yeah.
Yeah. But thank you for sharing that.
Okay.
And then
So,
our second poll is about financial challenges going into 2024. Perhaps it might be your budget control, cost savings, whether that's reducing headcount, freezing recruitment, or maybe you're going to have a challenge around investing in skills development and the training of your workforce. And of course, the national minimum wage, you know, that's a significant rise that we've seen announced in recent weeks. Probably the biggest rise in years.
absolutely.
Whatever.
I think these are going to align with the previous one as well. So I will close that poll now. Share those results.
Yeah.
There we go.
And I think, you know, with the cost of living, it doesn't come as a surprise, you know, the budget control, cost savings.
Yeah, and the recruiting because of the demands in the market for high salaries, and it's not easy just to pay what you need to get the people you need, because it affects the whole stability of your salary scales within the organisation already. So yeah, that's.
And like I shared on that initial slide, you know, we found just a few months ago, employers were struggling to meet the wage demands of job candidates.
Yeah.
And also, you know, there is more of a need for flexible hybrid working. You know, it's almost like the candidate market, isn't it? They're almost what's the phrase? They're in control, I guess, isn't it, in terms of what they're wanting and their needs.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'll hide that
Lovely,
one.
thank you for that.
Share the next one.
I think I've got a couple of other quicker polls, and this is all about the technology and artificial intelligence.
Okay, I'll close that poll and share the results.
Okay, so
that surprises me actually. It's so high.
Yeah. So 71% of you haven't or aren't using it. Whether in 2024 that would be different, who knows?
Yeah, absolutely.
29% of you are using it. It's actually interesting. I mean, we've sort of played around with it, you know, with the some of the tools, and it's quite interesting. But obviously, you need to be cautious about how you're using it. And I guess that leads on to our next poll, which is more about having a policy in place for how you use AI in the workplace. And we did run a webinar a few months ago that you can access a recording to on our website if anybody wanted to take a look, and that talks about the practical side of using AI in employment.
And the challenges, and making sure you
mitigate.
Mitigate those challenges. So the AI is only as good as the questions you ask, I should say.
Yeah. And it does get things wrong.
It does.
So what was the previous percentage? Was it in the 30s?
And 7.
Yeah, 70. Yeah. So around 30 odd of you do use AI, and significantly most of you that do use it don't have a policy. And I guess I mean, look back at our webinar, because that'll give you some helpful practical tips on the importance of having a policy and the practical implications, because as I said a moment ago, it's more the ethical and lawful use of it. But yeah, it's certainly important to get a policy in place.
There you go, back to you.
Thank you. So we're going to just touch on now a couple of the external influences that we're sort of going to be facing next year. And I guess it's no surprise we're going to continue with the cost of living crisis. So it means we're going to have to be more tight with managing our budgets, and obviously that's come through in the polls. And you've already seen probably the direct impact of the cost of living on your workforce. You may have seen an increase in mental health related sickness absence. There were some stats issued recently that showed a significant increase in mental health absences. Or you might be seeing a number of your employees taking on second jobs to help manage the financial challenges. Or equally, from an organisation's perspective, perhaps you've had to put a freeze on recruitment or spending. So it's going to continue, no doubt, into next year. And secondly, we also think that strategic people planning is going to be vital to help you managing that cost of living crisis. So when you come down, when it comes to planning for the year ahead, how you're managing your people initiatives, look at what you can do to help support your employees as we continue in the cost of living. Perhaps you might be able to afford introducing an employee assistance program, for example. They are invaluable for giving employees access to confidential help and support and guidance by an external party. You could look at the benefits that you offer and look at whether you can introduce any that can provide innovative ways of supporting the workforce. So, we hear of some organisations offering free lunches, for example, or depending on budgets, do you have scope to offer some form of financial one-off cost of living support bonus? I know some employers did do that last year, or this year, sorry. We're still in 2023. So there's going to be many ways that you can support employees. It doesn't always have to be financial. So just think as part of your strategic planning how you can address those going into next year. And as I said, it doesn't have to always be financial, and it could be things like even allowing employees some reasonable time out of the working day to help them attend some financial appointments with their banks or financial advisors. It's just seeing what's suitable for your organisation, what you can offer, because ultimately it's about supporting your employees. Another significant external influence is the prospect of a potential general election. There's lots of speculation in the news, and there has been for some time. All we know is that it must take place at the latest by the 28th of January 2025, because under UK law, obviously elections must take place 5 years from the day the current Parliament first met, plus there needs to be that time required to run that election campaign. So the latest is the 28th of January 2025. Any sooner than the decision for that election is going to be a political one, but current speculation is that there could be either May or October next year. As I said, this is all just speculation, it's what's in the news, but certainly this external influence will no doubt impact on business and employment, not only from a confidence perspective for businesses, because obviously when there's an election going on, it's that uncertainty, but potentially we'll see developments and changes in employment law priorities, particularly if there's going to be a change in government, which, there's speculation again that there could be a change in government. So this is something to be mindful of. We suspect it's going to be focused quite highly next year. But as I said, who knows, because it's all speculation, but it's something that can influence employment. So now we're going to focus on employment law developments, and I'm going to first of all talk through those that we know have a specific commencement date that's been announced. And just bear in mind that the ones that we're going to be talking about, the regulations are published. As always, they're published in draft format, so potentially they're subject to change. But essentially it will give us a broad awareness of what we are expecting to see happen and when, because we've got the commencement dates. And once I've taken you through that timeline, we're going to look at ones that have been passed and are made into laws, but we are waiting on date for them to become introduced. They could be introduced next year, or they could go on into the following year. And then I'll just flag to you some employment bills that are also on the horizon that could progress through Parliament quite quickly, and we'll see those again coming into force next year. But as I said right from the outset, this is really just giving you a headline of what's coming in. We will be going into detail about all of the new pieces of legislation when we run our employment law seminar in just a couple of months. So do come back and join us for that. So let's begin with just sort of clarifying where we're at. So we're going to see significant developments. And really, on the whole, it stems from the UK leaving the European Union, because a significant piece of law that's taking effect on the 31st of December is the retained EU law Reform Act of 2023. It's essentially this legislation that revokes the majority of European legislation and European case law that is currently underpinned in many pieces of our UK legislation. So this is a significant moment. So if you think, not all of our UK law is underpinned by EU law. There are things such as the working time regulations, part-time regulations, some discrimination acts. But essentially, this is a significant moment because essentially we're moving forward in 2024 with legislation that is purely UK based. There are also other developments in employment law that are unconnected to this that will also come into force next year. So I'm going to just take you through that. And as I said, the regulations that have been published in recent days and weeks are drafts, so subject to change, but essentially it will give us a good idea as to what we're expecting to see, when, and the overall purpose of them. So I've tried to illustrate it in a timeline for ease. I've mentioned the Retained EU Law Act, that's 31st of December. But what that means now is some new legislation needs to come in place to reinforce current ways of working and how we do things. So to follow up on it, the government have introduced what's called the Employment Rights Amendment, Revocation and Transitional Provision Regulations 2023. Bit of a mouthful. So what this will do is essentially it's going to reform significant parts of our legislation that have been underpinned by EU law up to now, and that includes, as I said, the working time regulations, specifically when it comes to record keeping, holiday pay and holiday entitlement, but it's also going to reform GP laws when it comes to obligations around consulting. And so this is going to be significant. They come into force in January, but there's several commencement dates, which I'll come on to explain. But essentially, we're going to see changes to those areas that I've talked about. Holiday pay and entitlement is a biggie. It's one that always causes challenge to employers, particularly on the back of the Harper Trust case. So there are going to be significant changes and developments in how we manage those two areas in particular. We then also have in January the Equality Act of 2010 amendment regulations. So again, this has come about because of the UK leaving the EU, because essentially the existing legislation of the Equality Act is based on EU law. These regulations are again still in draft format, and ultimately the aim is to update the existing legislation. So in practice, we won't see much difference because it's simply keeping the status quo. It's just making sure that the legislation moving forward is UK based and not obviously EU, because that's been revoked. So as I said, in terms of the Equality Act, it's just more about making sure it's UK based and shouldn't see significant change at this point in time. When it comes to immigration, this is separate to the whole EU piece and leaving the European Union. This is a standalone piece of legislation, and what we're going to see, and actually it's the first time in many years, probably a decade, we're going to see an increase to the fines that employers will be forced to pay if they're found to be recruiting and employing illegal workers. It's something like going up to something like £60,000 if there's repeated issues and things like that. It's significant. So that's going to be from January. Then we have a couple of quiet months, I'd like to think. And then we come into April, and April is typically a key point in the calendar for when legislation comes into effect, because you'll already be familiar that statutory rate increases normally happen in there. Your national minimum wage rates always happen around April, as I've noted on here. But we're also going to see the introduction of a new piece of legislation that gives entitlement for carers to time off to provide that care, and that's the Carers Leave Act of 2023. So this new entitlement will provide employees who have a dependent with a long-term care need and those who want to be absent from work to provide or arrange care for that dependent of up to 1 week of unpaid leave in a year. This new right is going to be effective from the 6th of April, and this is essentially just being confirmed in the last 48 hours, I think. So it's hot off the press. So effectively, it's the 6th of April it comes into force. And if any of you have got access to our knowledge base and subscribe to it, we have an article on there talking about what we expect to see from the Carers Leave Act. And obviously, we've got our seminar coming up where we're going to talk about it in further detail, because, you know, what do they mean by a dependent? How do they define that? How do you manage that week of leave, etc. So we'll cover all of that in our seminar. We then have further rights being introduced via the Protection from Redundancy, Pregnancy and Family Leave Act of 2023. So you'll probably be familiar, when you're managing redundancy programs, there is additional protection for those employees who are on maternity leave. So they have first refusal of suitable alternative roles if they have been made redundant. So what this piece of legislation will do is it'll extend that protection, and it'll be effective from the 6th of April. There's obviously some, depending on the situation, of course, and how those timeframes are managed, but the legislation, the extra protection will be afforded to pregnant workers, not just those on maternity leave, those on obviously adoption leave, shared parental leave, and the time period for which people are protected is going to be around those 18 months. So we've just had that confirmed. Again, that was a confirmation this week. We need to sort of understand how you manage that 18-month time frame. When does it start? When does it end? Kind of thing. But essentially, that protection is going to be in place from the 6th of April. We then also have the Employment Relations Flexible Working Act of 2023, and this is a bit of an odd one as of today, in that it's partially been confirmed. So we know it's coming in, but when it comes in is a bit unclear. All we know is that on the 6th of April, employees will have a day one right to flexible working. So at the moment, you've got that 26-week service. Well, from the 6th of April, anybody can, regardless of the length of service. The other aspects of the regulations of the legislation that's come into force haven't been given a commencement date yet. But given that we already know the 6th of April is when it's a day one right, we'd like to think that all the other parts of that piece of legislation will also come in on the same date. But I just need to flag that we don't actually have a commencement date for the other aspects of it. And it's all to do with how many applications people can put in a 12-month period, you know, the appeals side of things, timeframes for dealing with flexible working. So we're keeping an eye out, and obviously we'll post any updates as soon as we've had the commencement dates published for all those other aspects. But essentially, it's a day one right from the 6th of April. And then just the final note here. So I mentioned a moment ago about amending legislation around working time, holiday pay, entitlement, etc., as part of leaving the European Union. So the legislation is effective, or the legislation is live from January the 1st, but actually the commencement date of it is going to be April for some of the reforms. So for example, holiday pay and holiday entitlement changes that are being introduced, and that'll be things like your rolled up holiday pay, how you calculate holiday pay for those working irregular hours. That will be effective for the holiday year from April onwards, April 2024. So if you do have a workforce and of irregular hour users, and you do have a holiday year in your business that runs April to March, then there's going to be some significant changes coming in April, and there'll be some cost budgeting implications, and it's all down to how you calculate holiday pay for those working irregular hours. Other reforms are coming in later, but April is a significant date. And then also in May, we have, at present, it's scheduled for the 9th of May, and that's the trade union deductions of union subscriptions from wages in the public sector. And essentially, the draft regulations propose to update the process of deducting trade union subscriptions from public sector wages. And as I said, that's due to come in force on the 9th of May. So that's the first half of 2024. It's going to be busy. We've got new legislation, we've got amendments to existing legislation. So there's going to be a lot of updates to your company policies needed, guidelines, letters that accompany policies, etc. So there's a lot to get your head around. And the second half of the year is also interesting. So in July, we have the commencement date of the Employment Rights Amendment. So this is all linked back to the EU Reform Act and making it UK legislation rather than being based on EU. And in July, it's one of those reforms is around the TUPE consultation. So it's about reforming TUPE consultation, and that the requirements for small employers will allow SMEs with fewer than 50 employees that are proposing a transfer of any size to consult directly with their employees where there are no existing representations in place. So that's going to be from July. The consultation rules will also change to allow businesses of any size that are proposing to transfer fewer than 10 employees to be able to consult directly with employees when there are no existing reps in place. If you already have employee representatives and trade unions in place, you'll still be required to consult with those parties. So it's only those where you don't have those mechanisms in place, then you'll be able to consult directly with employees. And then finally, the Worker Protection Amendment of Equality Act, that's coming in on the 26th of October. And the implication of this new act is that it's going to place an increased responsibility on employers to prevent harassment of a sexual nature in the workplace. So again, there's going to be a great need in the second half of next year for making sure your policies are in place correctly, all the supporting documentation that accompanies those are in place as well. So that's the legislation that we have dates for. But there is a lot of other pieces of legislation we're waiting for the dates. So we know that there's going to be a new act that it's called the Strikes and Minimum Service Levels Act. We are waiting a commencement date, but essentially once it's in force, it's going to enable minimum service levels to be implemented in certain sectors. And those sectors will be the health services, fire and rescue, education, transport, border security, and then the other sector is the decommissioning of nuclear installations and the management of radioactive waste. So in those sectors, there will be that new legislation that allows employers to require a certain level of resource in place when there's strike action taking place, and there's going to be set procedures in how you manage that and communicate with your trade union. There's a code of practice that's been consulted on already and the government have responded to. And actually, it's probably, there is speculation that it could come in as quickly as December, literally any time, because the consultation and code of practice is all drafted, responded to. It's a matter of now passing it. And I think the speculation around it coming in place in December is because of, you know, around Christmas time, people using the rail networks, you know, the government don't want any of that to be disturbed, if you like, and impacted with when it's peak travel for people. As I said, that's all speculation, but it could be very, very soon. We also have the Employment Allocations of Tips Act. So this is obviously industry specific, and it's aimed at enabling workers to receive tips, gratuities and service charges that are paid by customers and are earned in full, meaning that the employer will be required to pass on all tips without deduction. And there's also going to be requirements for having a clear policy around how it's managed. Again, we don't know the commencement date, likelihood 2024, but we're yet to get confirmation. We then have the Workers' Predictable Terms and Conditions Act, which will provide workers with the right to request predictable hours of work. And again, it's likely that that's going to be a 2024 piece of legislation that comes in. And then we also have the Neonatal Care Leave and Pay Act, which at the moment there's talk of it being early 2025, but essentially that act will enable employees to take a period of leave of absence when their baby requires neonatal care. And neonatal care is care that is medical or palliative and would apply to someone with parental or other personal relationships with a child who has to receive or has received neonatal care. So that's something as well that's going to be coming in. And finally, we have the pensions extension of automatic enrolment. So at the moment, to automatically enrol somebody into a pension scheme, the minimum age of that individual is 22 years of age, but that age limit or restriction is going to be abolished. But again, that's not going to be for some time because there needs to be some changes to systems and pension rules and things like that. So that's not really going to be realistically a 2024 matter. So that's enough of me talking for a while. We have a poll. So Sue, over to you in launching the first one. And it's really if you feel prepared for the forthcoming employment law developments.
After all that.
Yeah.
I guess it depends how much of a surprise it all was. There still seem to be popping quite a few resolutions on some of the outstanding ones, don't they, at the moment?
Yeah.
Having a bit of a pre-Christmas clear out, I think.
I think that, yeah, I mean, this week, well, I've seen 3 developments, the carers leave, flexi working and the pregnancy maternity one. But like you say, it's just, we've got a week left, not even a week left of Parliament. So who knows what's going to come out in the next few days. In fact, then it could be coming out right as I talk.
Absolutely. Probably at 5:30 tomorrow.
Yeah. So let's see how do you feel? Do you feel prepared?
Oh, straight in the middle,
okay.
really.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, interesting. It's good that we've got a high number of you that feel prepared. That's great news. And hopefully this webinar will help you further just to refine any further preparations. Obviously, 51% of you don't feel prepared. Hopefully today is insightful for you. You can start sort of planning. Obviously, it'd be great to have you on our seminar in March where we're going to go into the real detail. But yeah.
Releasing stuff as it comes along. So if it requires a new policy or a new set of letters, we'll be drafting them. If it requires updates to existing ones, we'll be updating them. So we will try and keep everybody kind of up to speed as much as they need as they happen. Okay, so I'll share the next one.
Thank you. And it's about what your concern is around the forthcoming legislation changes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's close that and share those results.
Yeah, the internal procedures, getting all that up to date, and obviously then training it, because obviously it's critical that your line managers are trained. Lack of time. Interesting. Yeah, the financial impact of the additional leave and flexible working, you know, 32% feel that would be a big challenge.
Okay.
Yeah,
so shall I hide that one? And
one
the
final
last one, I think. Yeah. There we go.
Okay, so what are your current concerns when it comes to calculating? Is that one?
Yeah, calculating holiday pay. Yeah.
Holiday pay.
Yeah. Challenge to all of us. Ongoing.
Hopefully it'll be easier from April next year.
Yeah.
I say hopefully.
Although you still got to undo all the complexities that were introduced.
Yeah.
Only
Just
recently.
when you think you've got it clear in your head.
Yeah. Okay, I will close that poll and share the results. There we go.
Okay. Lack of guidance, updating current procedures. Yeah, it's just going to be about understanding it. Well, the current concerns, yeah, getting your head around it following that Supreme Court case. Yeah, poor record keeping. That's a crucial one, because if you haven't got the right records, then actually how can you establish the right holiday pay? You know, because it's all about looking back over 52 worked weeks and having those hours recorded correctly so you can get a fair and reasonable average hourly rate or average day, average hours worked each week.
Yep.
Yeah, so like Sue said, we're going to be publishing content over the next few weeks, months, around guidance on how to calculate the holiday pay moving forward, having the policy updated. So do look out for those that we share. And so I'm going to move on now to employment bills. And I guess employment bills, obviously very early stages of becoming legislation, and obviously they need to go through both houses of parliament and the House of Lords to be debated, voted on. But it's also worthwhile just knowing what's on the horizon. And I think a big one is going to be the Artificial Intelligence Regulations and Workers Bill. So that's currently going through. It's a long way to go still, but I suspect the appetite will be there to progress it quite quickly, given that how fast technology is advancing and the use of AI. So that's about regulating the use of AI in the workplace. We've also got a bill going through that would enable asylum seekers who have waited 6 months for a decision on their application to be able to take up employment. We also have a bill that focuses on bullying and respect at work, and ensuring that employers manage that fairly, reasonably, and put the right protections in place. There is also a carers and care workers bill. Now this is obviously different. We've talked about carers leave, and that's that entitlement to that time out to provide care. But this bill is looking about how we can improve the recruitment and retention of care workers, and even establish an independent National Care Workers Council that would have that responsibility for setting professional standards. Data protection and the Digital Information Bill, again, that's going to be critical, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's kind of fast-tracked through and given quite a priority, because of the links with obviously artificial intelligence and all of that going on, obviously the implications on data protection and safeguarding people's data. And this bill is about making reforms to current legislation. Obviously we have the UK GDPR, and it's about moving to a more of a risk-based approach rather than the current accountability obligations approach. There's the Employment Application Requirements Bill, and that would legislate and regulate the use of having minimum qualifications or experience requirements in job applications. There's the Employment and Trade Union Rights Dismissal and Engagement Bill. We've spoken a lot over the year. That came out on the back of the P&O ferries issue. If you remember, there was something like 800 people made redundant with no notice, literally instantly told to leave their jobs. And that came under scrutiny, and on the back of it, this bill was introduced. So it's about bringing in fair processes for how you can dismiss and re-engage employees in the business. There's other things like a fertility treatment bill, and that's about giving people time out of the workplace to attend appointments for fertility treatment. Health and safety bill about amending the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act, and that's about making provisions about civil liability for breaches of health and safety duties. There's a miscarriage leave bill. Again, it's about providing support and leave of absence for those that experience miscarriage. And then we've also got a non-disclosure agreements bill, and that's about making provisions about the content and use of non-disclosure agreements. Paternity leave and pay bill. This is one I suspect will again probably go through quite quickly, in that it's been a matter that's been ongoing for some time following a previous consultation process, but it's about extending the eligibility for paternity leave and pay. At the moment, it's only based on somebody's employment status and length of service and level of earnings. So it's about how we can make the regulations more flexible in terms of the timing of when somebody can use paternity leave, the notice period that people have to give for taking leave. So it's trying to make it more of a modern piece of legislation that is more flexible for employees to take. And then we also have the Workers' Rights and Definition Bill, and that's about providing and creating or amending the definition of a worker. So, you know, it is one area that is a challenge to many employers in terms of, you know, is somebody an employee, a worker, or are they self-employed? It can get really confusing and tricky because there's no black and white clear definition. It's about what's happening in practice and the communication and expectations that has to be all considered in the entirety. So having some definition is what that bill is trying to achieve. So as I said, they're just on the horizon. I'm not saying they're necessarily coming into place next year. It's just interesting to know what kind of priorities are going on at the moment. And obviously, as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, there is that potential impact of a general election, and if there's a change in government, priorities obviously change. So, but I just thought it's worthwhile just running through, letting you know what's on the horizon. And then before we close the webinar and take any questions, we've got 10 minutes, I think, left. Just wanted to flag to you that there's lots of resources out there. So as you know, we run annual surveys with businesses, small businesses, to understand what their challenges are, what their experiences are, and to sort of shed light on what they can expect for the next year. Now, I've just noticed a typo on the slide. It's expected next February, not the one just gone. So apologies for that. But essentially, that survey, when we publish it, it'll give you an idea as to what other businesses are experiencing and facing in terms of challenges, and we will give our analysis and suggestions as to how those challenges can be mitigated. We've also written a white paper. It's called Strategic HR Thinking for 2024, and it's about aligning people and business strategy. So we've pulled that together. It's currently being published, and hopefully we can expect to see that launch in January 2024. So do look out for that, because again, it'll give you insights into our thoughts as to what we can expect and how you can align people and business strategy. We're creating new template documentation all the time, new articles that are placed on our knowledge base or even our main website. So for all of that legislation that we've talked about, there will be updated and new policies, guidance, checklists, forms, you name it. So do keep an eye out on our knowledge base if you have access to it, or we do also sometimes provide some of that content on our document shop. And as I said at the outset, we are running our virtual employment law. So all of that I've talked through, we're going to go into detail about what it means to you on a practical level. How do you manage carers and time off? What is a dependent? How do you manage neonatal leave? What constitutes neonatal leave? All of those kind of things. So we're going to be talking about that in our virtual seminar, which is free to everybody. Just sign up either through the knowledge base or our main website. So before my voice goes, Sue, do we have any questions that we can talk through and help people with?
No specific questions.
Okay.
We did have somebody asking when the day one right confirmation had come in. It's literally yesterday, I think, wasn't it?
Day before.
Day before, yeah. So it's it was very recent. It's available on the government website. It is one of the statutory instruments. They've only brought in the Flexible Working Amendment Regulations 2023. It just deals with the point about the 6th of April implementation of the day one right. It doesn't deal with the rest of it yet.
No.
But that bit has been dealt with through one of the statutory instruments. So yeah, it's available on the government legislation website now. So we do know that's coming in from the 6th of April.
Yeah.
So that's all. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So I'm just going to wrap up the webinar. So I've talked quite a bit actually of reference knowledge base. So that's our online portal. It's a resource that can provide you with all the content that you may need, then such as template policies. There's guidance notes, there's articles on all aspects of the employment life cycle. There's over 600 articles. In fact, there's over 600 document templates, you name it, anything that you could need for the entire employee life cycle. So that's essentially all in our knowledge base. We obviously have links to our events and webinar recordings are all on there as well. So if you're interested, then obviously let us know at the end. We've got a poll that will run shortly, or get in touch, drop us an email or give us a call. And then we offer training courses as well, of course, ILM, both level 3 and 5. So that's a accredited ILM course. And then all of our management training courses will count towards CPD. So that's good for people's development. And as you can see, we cover a wide range of topics there, HR related. And of course, we continue to run our free webinars. We've got our program scheduled right through to the end of March. So in January, the new year, we're actually going to be focusing on apprenticeships because we've not done that for a while. So we're going to talk about how they can work and how it can be a solution to your recruitment challenges. We're running an additional webinar in January, which is all about the menopause in the workplace and how you can support employees. February's normal webinar is all about performance management, but not just at one level in the organisation, at all different levels and how you take a different approach depending on circumstances and situations. And then the employment law seminar is going to be on the 28th of March. It's 10 o'clock for a couple of hours. And as I said, we're going to go into detail about all the forthcoming legislative changes. So do sign up to that. It'd be great to have you join us for that event. One last poll before we close the webinar, and it's just really if you'd like to find out more about our services, then do let us know, whether it's HR services, health and safety, recruitment, payroll, training. Just please get in touch and answer the poll and we can get in touch with you.
Let's give that a couple of seconds. It's
Okay.
Coming through at the moment. Okay, I will
Yeah.
close that. Thank you
Thank
very much, everybody.
And thank you for attending webinar today. It's been great to have you. Hopefully you'll join us on our future ones, and hopefully today's information was informative. And as I said at the start, there's a lot to go on next year. So thank you for your time, and thank you, Sue and Hannah, for your support as well in the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.